Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us for July's Network Tech Talk. This is our normally scheduled monthly convening of entrepreneurs where we share tips and resources from entrepreneurs to provide you advice on the products and processes that may help you in your business into the future. And this free event is presented by the Central Maine Growth Council and is sponsored by CGI, Valley Beverage, the Harold Alfond Institute for Business Innovation at Thomas College, and Bricks Co-working and Innovation Space. Of course, Bricks has previously been our home for this. And in the fall, we do hope to get into back to in-person, as well as likely provide a hybrid option so we can connect at 10 Water Street, downtown Waterville, Maine, at the Hathaway Creative Center. For this Tech Talk, we are so thrilled to be able to introduce Chip Terry of BlueTrace and thinking about the blue economy of Maine and the growth of aquaculture for the state and for the economy and beyond. With that said, for folks that are either with us live right now or watching at home, thank you for joining us. This presentation is being recorded for later viewing, and the public may find these recordings at centralmaine.org/TechNight. Chip, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to give you some sharing authority now if you don't already have it.
Well, Garmin, thank you for having me, and Sabrina, thank you. It's awesome to be here. Just a little bit on my background, where I'm coming from. I grew up in Maine. I grew up in Southwest Harbor and up in Reedfield. For those of you in Central Maine, went to Marinacook, and moved to Boston for college, and basically had sort of stayed ever since. Ended up in the technology industry in Boston at a lot of different tech startups. Last company got acquired by Tesco, the big British retailer, and I eventually, my golden handcuffs ended, and I tried to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up. And I had a couple of friends who had started oyster farms up on the Bagadies River, up in Penobscot Bay. And in talking to them, I realized there was an opportunity here. So I thought what would be useful is to lead you through sort of my evolution or our evolution as a company, because most of you probably aren't going to be in the aquaculture space or the traceability space, but it'd be interesting to sort of see sort of how we got to where we are and where we're sort of headed. Because a year ago, we would have had this as our starting slide. It would have been Oyster Tracker, aquaculture management systems. This is the story we went out and we raised money with. We got our first set of clients with, and it's still in many ways part of our business. Because this is the story that I would tell every investor and partner, et cetera, which is, if you haven't seen an oyster farm, this is what one looks like. It might have 5 million oysters, 3,500 different bags. Every one of those bags might have 200 market-sized oysters or 5,000 half-inch oysters. And you're probably going to touch them anywhere between 5 and 10 times, the time you put them in the water and the time you harvest them. And so, in other words, a very complicated system, probably managed with a wet notebook and a whiteboard, maybe a transfer to Excel. And every farmer out there knows the challenges of this. The problem is you lose 40% of your crop between the time you put it in the water and the time you harvest it. Those 4 guys sitting on that boat, that's 70% of your operating costs. If they do a bad job, you're going to see a drop in quality, and your price per oyster is going to go from 70 cents an oyster to 25 cents an oyster. And try showing up at a bank or an insurance company and asking for something with a wet notebook. You're probably not going to be able to get financing. And so our solution has been to take that whiteboard and make it digital. Start with an iPad so you can manage your farm on a day-to-day basis, know what's going on, what did your team do yesterday, what do they need to do tomorrow. Use the data exhaust from that to analyze outcomes so you know what's working and what's not, and then you can optimize and plan for your future. And so this has been a great business for us. And the first question every investor asks is, how many oyster farms are there? How big is this market? What's the total addressable market? And there are roughly 2,500 oyster farms in North America, about 12,500 globally. You can see the distribution. They're growing about 20% year over year. So a big enough market that is interesting. And from our perspective, also a small enough market that we can own this market, and IBM or Microsoft is not going to show up and say, hey, we've got the be all and end all solution for you. But the other thing that's really interesting is that if you want to ship shellfish across state or provincial lines, you need to be on the interstate shellfish shippers list. And there are 2,900 companies on that list. So actually there's more companies on that list than there are oyster farmers, because actually it has to do with shipping mussels or clams, a bunch of different products, gooey ducks. And so, that's when we look at it and say, okay, this is our total addressable market, great business. But let's talk about how do we get to BlueTrace? How do we end up renaming ourselves BlueTrace, which by the way, is only about 3 or 4 months ago. And we got here because we spent a heck of a lot of time with our clients. We visited well over 100 farms, everywhere from France and Prince Edward Island and British Columbia to California to Washington State to Florida and Alabama, Virginia, etc. And what we saw is a lot of what we talked about as our initial problem, but we also saw a lot of guys like this, writing out tags by hand, writing harvester logs, receiving logs, and all the way step through to when it gets to a restaurant and they've got this very sophisticated system for storing their tags. And so this is taking a lot of time for a lot of folks. And so what we built is a way to reduce your paperwork friction. So I'm just going to play a short video. It's about 90 seconds. You may or may not have to adjust your audio.
Hi, this is Chip Terry from Oyster Tracker. In our journey over the last few years, we've made some great friends and learned a lot. One of the things we've learned is that shellfish are heavily regulated, and for very good reasons. No one wants to get anyone sick from their product. However, those regulations run to over 490 pages, and for farmers, that means a ton of paperwork. Harvester tags, harvester logs, invoices, dealer tags, and receiving logs, HACCP logs, state reporting, Vibrio logs. And as far as we can tell, no one likes doing that paperwork. It's simply a necessary evil that takes a lot of time and energy. Today, we're introducing a new solution to make that paperwork easier: harvester tag printing and harvester logs. The core of the solution is printing out your harvester tags from your phone to a wireless printer. A printer that prints on waterproof paper, runs on a battery that lasts 2 days. It doesn't require any ink, so you'll never have to run to the store for more. It also prints over 100 tags in 3 minutes. At the same time, we create a harvest log for you. So whether you need to check your invoicing or submit a report to the state, all your information is stored securely in the cloud. The tags also include a QR code, so when your product gets to the distributor, they can scan into their systems, and the end consumer can even learn more about your farm. In other words, we're making the paperwork a lot easier, and all for less than the cost of your current tagging. If you'd like to learn more, visit oystertracker.com or give us a call.
All right, so hopefully that gives you an overview of what we do. But I think the key point for any business is spend a lot of time with your clients, because we may not have known this if we just sat in our office and tried to figure this out. But having gone out and talked to these clients and watched what happens, you realize where the challenges are. And so we've got a current things that we do today and stuff that's sort of on our roadmap for the future, all based on spending a lot of time with our client.
Hi.
And if we think about it, we actually now have a new problem. It's really in addition to the one we were talking about before. Roughly 35,000 people a year get sick from eating shellfish every year, according to the CDC. The FDA has 478 pages of regulations. Each state has many more. And every company spends thousands of hours complying with those regulations. And yet every distributor we talk to says, I have at least a 30% error rate. And every regulator we talk to says at least 50% of our tracebacks fail. And by the way, there's a new rule that's just been passed by the US Congress called the Food Safety Modernization Act, where the FDA is writing new rules, which will probably be more extensive than the current rules. And by the way, will cover a lot more seafood. And this is what these rules basically say, which is every fishing vessel, whether you're lobsters or clams or halibut, will have a list of key data elements that you need to record at harvest. And then all through the chain, different key data elements will need to be recorded, all digitally, so that they can be inspected by local inspectors or federal inspectors. So this is a major change in this industry that's got broader than just shellfish. So this is where we're headed and why we look at this and say, well, we've got a great core business in the management of farms. This helping people stay compliant with evolving regulations is actually probably the bigger opportunity for us and why we've moved to BlueTrace. And we come at this as technologists. We come at this knowing that technology can do just about anything. It's really magic. But the technology that we're using that's really enabled these new solutions, every grumpy farmer, like this guy down in Duxbury, has a supercomputer in their pocket. Every one of them, like these folks out in Hog Island in California, are connected to the cloud. You can get there from any number of ways, but scanning a QR code is a really good one. It could also be RFID chips. And importantly for our solution, these thermal mobile printers are cheap now. They're like $300 to get one. It runs, it's very durable. You can put it on your farm, you're in your boat, in your truck, and print out your tags, print out other things as needed. Because ultimately, what everybody wants to know, if I'm going to eat into that oyster, I want to know, is it safe? Is it fresh? Is it legal? Is it sustainable? Where did it come from? Also want to know something about what's it going to taste like. Who grew it? Who is Abigail Carroll down on the Scarborough River? And how do they grow this product? That's the story that everybody wants. They want to know they're safe, but they also want the story of their food. And with digital tracing, you can actually do that. So today we have about 140 farmer clients. We've got 12 distributors that we're working with. We, thanks to Maine Technology Institute and others, we won a NOAA grant for SBIR. We've got a bunch of really great strategic investors like the Maine Venture Fund, CEI, folks from Boston like the Boston Food Loft. We've got 2 provisional patents. And most importantly, we've built strong relationships with our clients to give us a rapidly improving product, folks that are telling us what they need to be more successful in their businesses. And the reason we're able to execute against that is we have a really talented team. Many of us have worked together in the past. Myself, Andy Kearney is our CTO. He was one of the lead developers at Expedia. He happens to be based in Austin, Texas. Cam Kim was one of our clients and is based down in Newport News, Virginia. Ben Willauer, who many of you may know in Maine, is spent a lot of time around aquaculture and distribution. Drew Condon, he's the design director at HubSpot, a multi-billion-dollar startup out of Boston, brings us a great UX experience. And Kat Ganem down in Providence, Rhode Island, spends a lot of time with big data. We work together at Tesco. She works with places like Dollar General, et cetera, and really understands how to work with big companies. And then we've got this incredibly important board of directors, people like Abigail Carroll of None Such Oysters here in Maine, John Burns, the Maine Venture Fund, Dave Ford, who's a technology entrepreneur who has opened an oyster farm down in Rhode Island. Because this is really the core of our solution, and I don't need to reiterate it, but you can get the idea of a mobile app to a Bluetooth thermal printer to waterproof tags to an automated log. And then on the distributor side, being able to take that information straight in, add the other information, things like time and temp that you receive things, create an inventory, and then ship it back out, all from your phone in a wet, cold environment. So why don't I stop there and see if other people have questions.
Yeah, I'll jump in and thank you for this, Jeff. Within the context of traceability and how important traceability has come onto the scene within the last decade, so, and certainly critically important for us here in Maine and the value of our fisheries. It would appear that the nature of traceability has a variety of reasons, whether it's seafood fraud, or maybe the proverbial, is it fresh or is it frozen or is it frozen fresh? Um, what, and I know you touched on this a little bit, but for the audience, can you touch on just the philosophical importance of traceability, number one, and then number two, the driver of traceability in this instance with regards to open source oyster aquaculture farming.
Sure. Yeah, I'll start with the fact that I didn't know we were doing traceability. I thought we were just printing out tags. And then I've learned that we're actually doing traceability. And, there are a bunch of different reasons. The most obvious one, and the one that is sort of front of everybody's mind, is compliance. We have a client down in Cape Cod who had a guy printing out tags. He was writing out all the tag information. He forgot to put the date on a bunch of tags. Got stopped by the inspector. The inspector says, well, you don't have date on these 3 tags, so we are going to assume this whole shipment is fraudulent. $5,000 worth of product disposed of that day. That's front and center for most farmers and distributors, is just compliance with regulations. Those regulations exist for a number of different reasons, and they're all really good. Number one is just food safety. Nobody wants to get sick. Number two is making sure that you harvested from open spaces, that this was a legal harvest. We're talking to folks out in British Columbia, and they'll talk about clam laundering, which is, I harvested in a spot that should have been closed, and then I pretend like it was an open area, and I put a tag on it that says it was an open area. So there's a bunch of things around managing your fisheries that traceability really matters. And then particularly internationally, a lot of it's around making sure that human welfare is taken care of. There's places that are essentially use slave labor, particularly in boats. And if you've seen Seaspiracy, the Netflix video, you've seen some information about that. So there's a lot of different reasons to do traceability. But certainly regulatory compliance is probably front and center. And then from a state level, a state like Maine, the fishery is incredibly important, whether it's oysters, clams, lobster, groundfish, and being able to say that this is truly a Maine product and that it was harvested in a sustainable fashion means that your brand continues to be strong.
Great, thank you for that. Maybe just a little bit, somewhat of a follow-up, but I guess maybe a obvious next question would be, do you see BlueTrace expanding into other species, other fisheries? We focus on lobster, but it could be an innumerable amount of other species, seafood products.
Yes, I think that's, we already do pretty much all shellfish. We even do gooey ducks. Particularly with these new FDA rules, they're essentially bringing a lot of the regulations that are in shellfish into the rest of seafood. And so I think we'll naturally expand there.
Great, thank you. I'm going to pause just for a moment to see if anybody else would like to.
Chip, thank you so much for the incredible story that you've shared with us. A question that I had was something that was touched upon in the video. So kind of mentioning how with the QR code, it's available data-wise for customers to see kind of where their product is coming from. How does that translate, and how do you kind of tell that tied to table story? How did that start, and where do you see that going?
It's interesting. This is one of those areas that COVID's actually been really good for QR codes. If you've been to a restaurant since COVID started, actually menus are starting to be a QR code. People have learned how to do QR codes. And every one of our phones for the last 2 years has a QR code reader built into the photo option. So what QR codes let you do is essentially a database call. And so if you're not logged in, if you're just an end consumer, you can scan that code and learn more about that farm, about that product, about where that was particularly harvested. So it's a great thing for just telling the story about your farm. if you're logged in as a distributor, you can scan that same code and now learn, exactly what time of date it was harvested, when it was put on ice, when it was shipped, all the information you're going to need on your receiving log, and you can pass it right into your receiving log. So that same QR code, because it's really just a database call, we can look at this and say, we know what to do with that.
Very cool. Thank you,
Yeah.
Chip.
Chip, can you touch on kind of the market, if you will, and just the competition in terms of where you guys see yourself as well with regards to that competition?
We're of course much better.
Agreed.
I mean, there's lots of different competition. So there is generic traceability software that exists, that's out there. There's a lot of ERP systems like a CSoft, Microsoft Dynamics, etc., that help you manage your current operation. They're not great at passing information across operations, which is really where we specialize. There are, in most small farms or distributors, our biggest competition is a wet notebook and Excel. And that's, we're really targeted at that small to medium-sized market right now.
Great. And I guess related to that, and of course, always where you feel comfortable touching on, with regards to kind of revenue verticals and the business model, what does that look like? And the printer, is that something in-house, or that's kind of also partnering with a third-party company? So kind of what do revenue verticals look like for the operation?
Yeah, so I won't give you specific numbers, but just in terms of revenue, we have grown, each quarter for the last 2 quarters, we've grown over 40% quarter over quarter. It's amazing to grow year over year because COVID sucked. So it's 200+% year over year, which isn't really fair. But revenue is growing in a nice clip. What we do for a client who wants tagging is they get this little printer that with this plus enough tags for about 1,500 tags, enough paper for about 1,500 tags is $500 plus shipping. So that's sort of an upfront cost. If all you need in a year is that 1,500 tags, that's all you pay. There's no monthly fee. There's no charge beyond that. So for a lot of small farmers, that was really critical because initially we were like, oh, we'll do the monthly fee, and then we realized places like Maine, where you shut down a lot of these farms in the winter, it doesn't make sense to continue paying a monthly fee. And so essentially we do the replenishment market. You run out of tags, you come back to us to get more tags. We can buy them in bulk. We can sell them to you, probably for what you're spending on a current tag today. And that's our revenue model. It's essentially a usage-based revenue model on the tagging. Farm Manager is more of a traditional SaaS product, so monthly fee or an annual fee. And Distributor is a little bit more of a traditional, it's a bit of a hybrid. So it's monthly fee plus tagging costs.
Great, thank you. You kind of touched on the entrepreneurial landscape in Maine, a little bit of outside of Maine as well, but just in terms of you and your team, do you mind just fleshing out kind of what's been helpful for you in that landscape, and just that juxtaposition of this is not your first foray either. Any particular flagship moments and or partners or resources coming out of the state of Maine for you and your team?
Yeah, I mean, Maine is really fortunate to have a lot of support. I mean, I've been in the Boston ecosystem forever, and obviously the Boston ecosystem is much larger, many more venture capitalists, etc. But Maine has a lot of really interesting support. I'd say the Maine Technology Institute is really great. They have grants available. They have a lot of support available. CEI has been awesome. The Maine Venture Fund, who invested in us, have been great. So I would say all of those, are really nice, great folks to be involved with. And then, of course, people like yourself who are organizing different folks. I would say Maine for us has been great because the Maine brand is incredibly strong in seafood. So being from Maine is actually important. And knowing a bunch of people here and knowing all these small producers or large distributors in Maine has been really helpful as well. You know, the way I talk about it is we learn in Maine and we profit outside of Maine. So yeah, we have a lot of clients in Maine and we learn a lot from them, but really our, you know, the bulk of our revenue comes from outside of Maine.
Yeah, great, thank you. Just pausing here for a moment.
Chip, another question I kind of had based off what you discussed kind of with the market size and what that looks like in the United States. How have you and BlueTrace kind of capitalized on that target market and, you know, acquired your customer base, considering there are approximately, as you said, 2,500 oyster farms in the US?
I mean, we have a benefit is that every oyster farmer is registered with the state. You lease money from whatever state, lease property from whatever state. So there's a list available. It's a little bit hard sometimes to get to, but you can usually find every oyster farmer. And then it's just being part of their network. It's, you know, hiring people like Cam who are farmers themselves, and you begin to, you know, get word of mouth going. And that's really been critical. And then as we moved into this distributor space, knowing that, you know, who you sell to, and then, you know, they see these tags show up and they say, oh, I get it. This would be really nice in my business. And then distributors going back to their suppliers saying, you know, it would be great if you would give us tags like this that makes our lives a lot easier. And so that network effect is really critical.
That's great. So I guess another question I would have is kind of how do you see BlueTrace, you know, being utilized not only in the US, but globally in the future, say in the next, you know, 1 to 5 years, if you kind of have that timeline?
Yeah. So today, you know, we're largely focused on the North American market. We have clients, a bunch of clients in Canada, a couple of clients in Mexico, and I think pretty much every coastal state. We're still working on Texas. But we've got, you know, so we've got good penetration. We've got a lot of growth here. We actually have a client in Dubai, bizarrely enough. Anybody who imports to the US, we're actually a natural solution for them. And that's probably our natural way of then going externally. And we've had clients, we have clients in Ireland. We've talked to a bunch of folks over in France. You know, regulations tend to be similar but different, and just different enough that you want to be careful about, you know, telling the Irish that we can solve your regulatory problems. You know, I think over time, we basically have 2 directions of expansion, one of which is broader in the seafood market, and the other is international. Those 2 actually go together because roughly 90% of the seafood we eat is imported. As you expand to different products, you know, shrimp, then you're expanding to India and expanding to South America. You know, if you're expanding to salmon, you're going to Norway. And so, you know, it's just that natural way of things going.
Very cool. I guess one other follow-up question that I would have is how do you see not necessarily the integration, but kind of the comparison of compliance, both globally and federally? You know, what are some of the things that you've seen that could become problems, or what do you think are some of the things that BlueTrace could provide as a solution?
Yeah, I mean, the regulations continue to get stronger. And they're basically requiring digital. And so I think that is going to be a trend that is continuing on. And the problem in the seafood world is there's a lot of small to mid-sized players. And small to mid-sized players do not have the infrastructure, whether it's people who know how to deal with it or just the money to invest in it for technology solutions. And so I think that's where you're going to see sort of the biggest rub. You know, when you go and tell every lobsterman in the coast of Maine, you must have a digital traceability solution, that's going to be a tough one. And I don't want to be in there. So that's, you know, that's what's coming down. And there's going to be some big fights over this, I think. And one of the ways we're sort of playing in this is hopefully we can smooth some of that out.
Very cool. Thank you.
Hey, Chip, thanks for this info. It's really informative for us. And being from Maine, this is going to be valuable for a lot of our folks here and obviously across the nation. But You just touched on something that always speaks to me. I work with a lot of very small oyster farmers. And so that person or those businesses are highly varied. A lot of them are small, right? Very small, small to mid-sized mostly. How does this product and this package fit for the small to medium-sized guys? Can you just talk about how that would fit them from a pricing perspective, or how do we get that to that consumer? How does that work?
Yeah, and so we priced it, as I was saying, on a usage base. So for most folks, $500 will last for a year and a half. And that's probably what they're already spending on tags. And the amount of time it's going to save them, they all have phones already. So they don't need to go buy a new phone. The printer comes with a 2-year warranty. And it's, splash proof, not waterproof, but you can drop it from 6 feet. And so we priced it particularly for those small to mid-sized folks. But there will always be folks that are too small to really matter, or whether this won't move the needle for them, and they'll probably continue with the handwriting. So we work with some distributors who work largely with local clammers in the mid-coast. Yeah. He's got 50 clammers lined up outside their door on after a tide. Those 50 clammers are never going to buy our solution, but we can have a solution for that distributor to make it so they can get digital traceability coming in the door. And so that's going to be sort of the natural solution for some parts of these markets.
Great, thank you.
Just curious, in thinking about kind of client acquisition, and thinking about the nature of harvesters and their work hours, whether they're on a boat, and what that kind of onboarding a client looks like. And how much education was needed, or was the harvester really understanding, like, is the sell like, this is regulatory compliance, you need this? How much education was needed, and what is that? How is that fluidity for you of onboarding the proverbial harvester? Not to suggest these are very sophisticated operations, deep in science, so not saying that they are not, but what was that kind of client onboarding look like for you and your team?
Yeah, well, first of all, I've had to learn the tide tables in a lot of different locations because tides actually matter a lot. I very seldom have gone to meetings that were at 3 a.m. at low tide, so I can wander around in the mud. But that's what happens in this world. Part of this is making usable software. Every one of these guys and gals knows how to use their phone. They know how to use their phone pretty well, and they mostly manage actually their business from their phone. They're texting their suppliers, they're texting their clients, they're texting their workers to say, okay, here's what we need to do today. So how do we fit into that paradigm rather than having something where they're going to sit behind a desk? So that's been sort of critical for us. And then making it, automated as possible, so that, you can do this at 2 a.m. if that's what makes sense for you, and you can get it set up yourself. I mean, we have clients that, quite honestly, ever since they bought from us, we haven't talked to them, but we can see them using it every day. And that's perfect. That's great for us and great for them. We'd love to talk to you, but if you don't want to talk to us because you got other things going on, that's great. We'd rather have you do that.
Great, thank you. And maybe lastly, but just pausing here a little bit, but Chip, and where of course you feel comfortable only, in terms of exit strategy or an outlook, what's your thinking there for BlueTrace?
Honestly, we're having so much fun just growing this business that we aren't really worried about an exit strategy. This is not going to be a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. We don't expect this to be the next Facebook, but we'll make a living at it. We've got good cash in the bank. We've got a growing business. At some point I'll want to retire, and at that point we'll figure out a transition. But for right now, we want to make a business that makes sense for our clients and for us. And although we come out of the tech industry, we're not looking at this as a quick exit.
Great, thank you. And how fortunate are we to have these innovative products into the blue economy here in Maine, and hopefully sending them around the world. With that said, just pausing here for a moment. A really wonderful conversation here. Thank you for the folks that are joining us. Thank you to the folks that are watching at home. You can find more information on BlueTrace at www.blue/trace.com. And Sabrina, you want to send us away?
Thank you, Garvin. And thank you again to Chip for joining us today. Really great conversation we've had, and it's really great to learn about the ever-changing aquaculture management platform that is BlueTrace and where it plans to go. All right, so our next Tech Talk, which will be Thursday, August 12th, will feature Gray Optics, which is shaping the future of biomedical and industrial optics with Daniel Gray, the founder and CEO. And I look forward to seeing you all next month. Have a great rest of your week.